For more than half a century, families have settled in front of their screens to watch a young postulant twirl across an Austrian hillside and sing her way into the hearts of 7 children and 1 stern naval captain. The Sound of Music has become more than a movie. It's a tradition, a comfort, a piece of cultural shorthand for warmth and hope. Generation after generation has hummed along to Do Re Mi, teared up at Edelweiss, and cheered as a family climbs toward freedom in the film's final moments. It feels timeless, effortless, almost inevitable, as though it could only ever have turned out exactly the way it did. But the glowing, polished film that audiences know was built on top of a production riddled with danger, heartbreak, last-minute panic, and creative gambles that could easily have gone the other way. A leading man who nearly turned the role down. A leading lady knocked off her feet by helicopter winds. A studio one expensive failure away from collapse, betting everything on a story about nuns and children and music. None of that desperation, none of that risk makes it onto the screen, and that's exactly the point. Today we're pulling back the curtain on 25 things most fans never knew about the making of this beloved classic. Starting with a leading man, a love of local pastries, and a costume department working overtime to keep his uniform buttoned. Salzburg in the mid-1960s was full of temptation for a man with a sweet tooth, and Christopher Plummer, cast as the rigid, disciplined Captain Von Trapp, discovered the local bakeries with real enthusiasm. As filming dragged on, his crisp military jackets and tailored suits began to fit a little snugger than they had on day one. Rather than make a fuss, the costume team quietly let out seams and reworked the fit behind the scenes so nobody outside the department would notice. It became an inside joke among the crew, and Plummer himself later laughed about it in interviews, but at the time it added one more layer of stress to a shoot that already had plenty. That sweeping image of Maria spinning alone on a mountaintop, arms thrown wide, is one of the most recognizable openings in film history. Capturing it required a helicopter to circle low overhead while a camera mounted on the aircraft swept in toward Andrews. What nobody planned for was the force of the rotor wash. Every time the helicopter passed close, the downdraft hit her hard enough to knock her flat onto the grass. She got up, reset, and did it again and again, until the crew finally had a usable take. There was no stunt double for the shot, no cushioned landing, just an actress determined to get back on her feet each time the wind threw her down. The breezy, joyful shot audiences see today hides dozens of unglamorous tumbles in the Austrian dirt. According to crew lore that circulated for years, Plummer once arrived on location in a genuine fury, certain that scenes were being shot without him and that he'd somehow been cut out of the plan. The tension lasted only as long as it took someone to check the call sheet. It turned out to simply be his day off. The embarrassment passed quickly, but the story stuck around as a reminder of just how easy it was to lose track of time on a production this sprawling and demanding. Few moments in the film feel lighter than the Von Trapp children tumbling out of a capsized rowboat into the lake. Behind the laughter, though, was real danger. One of the young performers couldn't swim, and when the boat flipped on cue, that child genuinely struggled to resurface. Julie Andrews, still soaked and in character, noticed immediately and helped pull the child to safety before anyone realized how close things had come to disaster. The scene made the final cut looking exactly as cheerful as intended, with no hint of the fear that rippled through the set that day. Months of long days, shared rehearsals, and the strange intimacy of pretending to be a family will do that to a group of kids and teenagers. Several of the young actors developed feelings for each other as filming wore on. Some kept quiet and others impossible to hide from the rest of the cast. Decades later, more than one of them has spoken fondly in interviews about those innocent, awkward crushes. A sweet footnote to a production that otherwise demanded total professionalism from its youngest stars. Before director Robert Wise signed on, the project had been shaped with a far heavier tone in mind, leaning hard into the menace of the Nazi annexation of Austria rather than treating it as a backdrop to a family's escape. Had that vision gone forward, audiences might have gotten something closer to a grim political drama with songs bolted on, rather than the hopeful, music-filled story we know. Wise's instinct to balance the encroaching darkness with warmth and joy is widely credited as the choice that made the final film resonate the way it has for generations. It's a reminder that the tone of a beloved classic can hinge on a single creative decision made long before a single frame is shot. The 16 going on 17 sequence, with its leaping choreography across rain-slicked benches, looks effortless on screen. Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, has described how unsuitable footwear combined with a slippery set led to a painful ankle injury during filming. With the schedule locked in, there was little room to stop and recover, so she pushed through the remaining takes. Watch closely and you can spot a few moments where her movements look just slightly more careful than the choreography called for. Casting the role took time, and several established stars were floated before Andrews became the obvious choice. What ultimately tipped the scales was footage from her then unreleased performance in Mary Poppins, which Disney allowed 20th Century Fox executives to preview. The moment they saw it, the search effectively ended. That single screening helped launch one of the most remarkable back-to-back star turns in Hollywood history. When Captain Von Trapp performs Edelweiss at the Salzburg Festival, the emotion on Plummer's face is unmistakable. But for years most viewers didn't realize the singing voice layered over his performance belonged to vocalist Bill Lee, brought in during post-production because the studio wanted a different musical quality than Plummer could deliver. Plummer, who had rehearsed and performed the songs himself, was reportedly frustrated to learn his voice would be replaced. Dubbing was common practice in the era's musicals. Plenty of leading actors of the period found their singing swapped out for a studio-preferred voice. But that didn't make the decision sting any less personally for an actor who had genuinely worked to nail those songs himself. Child labor laws meant the 7 young actors playing the Von Trapp children had to keep up with their education no matter how packed the filming schedule got. Tutors worked on set, pulling kids aside between takes for lessons that ranged from arithmetic to history, often still in costume. It made for an unusual rhythm, performing for the cameras one moment, working through schoolwork the next. But the shared experience also built genuine bonds among the young cast as they studied and struggled together. The Broadway version of the musical included numbers that worked beautifully in a theater but didn't translate well to film. How Can Love Survive? And No Way to Stop It, both built around the Baroness and Max and their wry cynicism about love and politics, were cut before cameras ever rolled. Removing them streamlined the story, kept the focus on Maria's emotional journey, and even softened a couple of the supporting characters in the process. Tucked into the I Have Confidence sequence, as Maria strides through the streets of Salzburg, the real Maria Von Trapp, whose memoir inspired the entire story, briefly walks past in the background. Nothing draws attention to her, and most viewers have watched the film dozens of times without ever spotting the elderly woman crossing paths with her fictional younger self. It's a quiet bridge between Hollywood's version of the story and the real life that inspired it. Filming on location meant the production needed swastikas and Nazi flags for several key scenes, and Austrian authorities weren't eager to allow it. With the war's end still less than 2 decades behind them, many residents had lived through the occupation firsthand, and seeing those symbols again, even for a film condemning fascism, stirred painful memories. Negotiations were delicate, some locations declined to participate at all, and the crew worked quickly and carefully wherever the imagery was unavoidable. 20th Century Fox greenlit the production while still reeling from the catastrophic overruns of Cleopatra, a film that had pushed the studio to the financial brink. That backdrop meant every dollar spent on this shoot was scrutinized, and every delay carried extra weight. The eventual payoff was enormous. The film became one of the highest-grossing releases of its era, generating profits substantial enough to help steady the entire studio. The sun-drenched alpine visuals that define the film's look required cooperative weather that the production simply didn't get. Storms rolled through Salzburg for days and then weeks at a stretch, idling cast and crew while costs piled up. Interior scenes filled some of the downtime, but several outdoor sequences couldn't be faked on a soundstage. When the skies finally cleared, the crew raced to capture as much usable footage as possible before the next round of rain arrived. A frantic rhythm completely invisible in the finished film's serene, sunlit exteriors. Charmian Carr was 21 years old when she played the supposedly 16-year-old eldest Von Trapp daughter. The 5-year gap required careful work from hair, makeup, lighting, and Carr's own naturally youthful features to sell the illusion convincingly. It clearly worked. Audiences accepted her as a teenager on the cusp of adulthood without a second thought, and the role remains one of the film's most beloved performances. The film's climactic flight over the Alps into Switzerland makes for a stirring finale, but it isn't how things actually happened, and geographically it couldn't have. The mountains nearest Salzburg lead toward Germany, not neutral territory, meaning the route shown on screen would have walked the family straight into greater danger rather than away from it. In reality, the Von Trapp family left by train to Italy and made their way to the United States through ordinary, far less cinematic travel. Filmmakers chose emotional resonance over strict accuracy, and the climb toward the light remains one of the most memorable endings in movie history regardless. On screen, the family home reads as one grand, continuous estate. In reality, the production combined the exteriors of one property, the interiors of another, and additional elements from a third location, plus a few details built on soundstages back in Hollywood, into a single seamless illusion. Careful continuity work and matched lighting let editors cut between these completely different places without viewers ever noticing the house wasn't real. Years before Hollywood came calling, the Von Trapp family sold the rights to their story for what seemed like a reasonable sum at the time. That deal left them with only a small fraction of the fortune the eventual stage and film adaptations would generate. Maria Von Trapp reportedly received only a few $1,000s for the film rights, a strikingly small amount given the hundreds of millions the movie would go on to earn. The family kept running their lodge in Vermont and continued making personal appearances tied to their story, but they never saw wealth that matched their story's massive global reach. It's a quietly bittersweet footnote to a film whose entire premise is the triumph of one family's courage. Even with genuine Austrian scenery available, the production still leaned on classic studio artistry to expand what the cameras alone could capture. Skilled painters created sweeping matte backgrounds that blended seamlessly with real footage, extending mountain views and filling in windows on interior sets with painted vistas of Salzburg. The craftsmanship was meticulous enough that audiences have never been able to tell where the Real Alps end and the painted ones begin. When he was first offered the part of Captain Von Trapp, Plummer wasn't impressed. He reportedly found the material overly sentimental and worried it would pigeonhole an actor with serious dramatic ambitions. He even joked privately that he wanted nothing to do with what he dismissively nicknamed the project. What ultimately won him over was a combination of a strong salary and director Robert Wise's willingness to let him bring more age and complexity to the captain than the script originally called for, turning a potential cardboard authority figure into one of the film's most layered performances. Just before production was set to start, a hair treatment meant to perfect Andrews's look went badly wrong, leaving her hair an alarming orange that was completely unusable on camera. With sets built and the schedule locked, the styling team scrambled to neutralize the color without causing further damage, working intensively until they reached a shade that finally passed for Maria. By the time cameras rolled, no trace of the crisis remained. I Have Confidence and Something Good never appeared on Broadway. Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote them specifically for the screen adaptation, giving Maria an internal journey on her way to the villa and providing an intimate duet between her and the captain that the stage version simply didn't have. Both songs blend so naturally into the story that audiences unfamiliar with the original musical rarely realize they were added later. When it finally reached theaters, the movie didn't just perform well. It became a genuine phenomenon, with audiences returning to see it again and again. It went on to win 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, silencing critics who had initially dismissed the material as lightweight. For 20th Century Fox, still recovering from near financial collapse, the windfall was enormous, funding years of future productions and proving that sincere, well-crafted family entertainment could go toe-to-toe with any other genre at the box office. Helicopter downdrafts knocked Julie Andrews to the ground again and again. A child nearly went under during a scene meant to look playful. An actor reluctantly took a role he initially dismissed, only to deliver one of his most memorable performances. Behind nearly every frame of warmth and polish sat some kind of struggle the camera never caught. Knowing all of this doesn't diminish the magic of The Sound of Music. If anything, it makes the achievement more impressive. What audiences have cherished for 60 years wasn't effortless at all. It was built take by people determined to make it look that way. 6 decades on, the film still draws families back to the same alpine meadows, the same gazebo, the same farewell at the Salzburg Festival. Only now with a little more appreciation for everything it took to get there. Every twirl, every harmony, every triumphant climb up that mountainside carries a little more weight once you know what was happening just out of frame. The falls nobody planned for, the doubts nobody voiced on camera, the quiet sacrifices made by people determined to finish what they started. That's often how the most enduring films get made, Not through some charmed, frictionless process, but through ordinary people pushing through extraordinary pressure until something timeless comes out the other side. Which of these behind-the-scenes secrets surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this look behind the curtain, stick around for more hidden stories from the films you thought you already knew.